but there was a certain level of invisibility of black folks in Montreal, which changed dramatically in 1968, 1969 as a result of the Congress of Black Writers and the way it was covered nationally and internationally to a certain extent in the press. And absolutely the Sir George Williams affair, because it became an international incident because these Caribbean students were perceived as carrying out this protest which resulted in an act of sabotage and destruction to the computer center at Concordia, or what is now Concordia University. The Caribbean and United States, I mentioned it, James Foreman, Harry Edwards, Stokely Carmichael, of course. From England, Jamaica came Richard Small, Walter Rodney is there, Bobby Hill, who was living in Jamaica at the time but was in Canada before that, goes back to Jamaica. So it's this kind of black left radical / nationalist event that I think for many folks sort of became this opening into the quote-unquote black world. I think you can think about it in political terms. I think you can think about it in terms of relationships that evolved. So for example, Stokely Carmichael meets Tim Hector, who's from Antigua, and Rosie Douglas, former Prime Minister of Dominica, but at the time was one of the key organizers of this event, and they die lifelong friends, like the closest of friends. It goes back to that moment where they were essentially kindred spirits. Not only were members of the black left in Montreal and the Caribbean left in Montreal constantly thinking and theorizing while they were acting, but even the French Quebecois left was drawing on the thoughts of Aimé Césaire, Frantz Fanon, Edouard Glissant. I mean, they all happened to be from Martinique, but they were thinking about anti-colonial struggles in other contexts too, the Vietnam struggle, Algeria, African liberation movements. They were drawing on that in order to facilitate their own understanding of their particular subjective experience in Montreal. I mean, it's hard to overestimate how significant the thought and writing of Aimé Césaire was on a whole generation of Quebec poets and writers.
Now, one of the things that I research is the impact of the Black Panther Party internationally, in particular the role of Connie Matthews, who was the Panthers International Coordinator. She's a Jamaican woman who goes to Europe. She joins the Black Panther Party and becomes the Panthers International Coordinator without ever having been to the United States of America. So something about her understandings and her experiences of racial oppression through her travels, going from Jamaica to Europe for study, being part of that upsurge of students in England at the time, fighting back against the restrictions that were there, and going on to a place where she could be a key conduit between Bobby Seale, when he comes to Europe to try to gain support, and the members of the white left. She becomes their international coordinator. And she became one of the major spokespeople for the Black Panther Party in the Scandinavian countries. She was quoted in many newspapers in Sweden, in Holland, in Finland, in different parts of Germany. She traveled widely. She offered support to anti-war soldiers and soldiers who had gone AWOL who ended up in Sweden. She played a really big role sort of bringing the Panther presence to Europe. Another comment that came to mind is, of course, this ideal of it being a man's world. I think one of the things about the book is that it brings you in. I mean, it makes you just feel that moment of those activist moments and the potential and the power and the passion of the people. And then you get there and then you realize, well, wow, you know, me looking in the mirror, me as a woman, if I was there, would I have not been able to speak my piece, you know, at this liberatory moment? And what does that mean in the larger sense? To what extent, by not speaking my piece, perhaps did I live to fight another day? Was that a strategic importance? You know, the fact that African American women and women in the moments and from the places that are described in the book were kept out of that spotlight. Was there sort of power in the shadows that these women were able to wield? How did they understand their exclusions? How did they wield power without and outside and inside of all of that? I think the book really raised a lot of questions about that. I think those are important questions. We want to know, you know, about who's sleeping with who, right? Because oftentimes the daytime is sort of like being a sundown and sunup revolutionary doesn't quite match up with the rhetoric that's being proposed. So to what extent can we kind of look at people's personal politics as a representative of both the potential of the movement and the limitations of the movement? I think the book really invites us to that. What about interracial relationships? What about the relationships between the Canadian blacks and the Caribbean immigrants? Right? Today I saw an article in the paper talking about how Ivy League schools are diversifying, pretending to diversify by bringing in students who are African immigrants. And to what extent is that creating political chaos, opportunity, alliances, fueling prejudices? How can we understand the diversity within blackness and how it operates politically, and what are the potentials for Solidarity Day? I think the book really asks and answers a lot of these questions.
Spent 30 years in this country, and like much more than almost 3 times the time I spent in Jamaica. Not quite, I'm not that old. But what I'm saying is, I might be though. And so like I'm this complicated transnational figure embodied before you, right? Who's trying to think about these things in really complicated ways. And so for me, what that first marks is the limits of nationalism. The profound limits of the national, right? Which makes the kind of fulcrum of Montreal, or Montreal, as my ex-roommate calls it, really necessary, to kind of be able to cross these fictive borders that we inherit from the history of colonization, and kind of transcend them in ways that are provocative and disturbing. So I'm saying all that to say 2 things. So there's something about contemporary kind of social or political organization that is preoccupied with nostalgia, and also preoccupied with a certain kind of presentism, meaning that history began yesterday, right? Or, history is like way back when. And the kind of knotty questions of how do we get to a place of radical collaborative kind of organization in this moment, right? After this kind of post-civil rights malaise, post-colonial malaise, where everything has been privatized, where neo-colonial, neoliberal kind of practices are everywhere to be found. A book like the book that David produced has its home in a university, right? Which is a corporate university right now. I think we can all say. And you think about the moment of a Walter Rodney, a C.L.R. James, a Bobby Hill in the 1960s, there was something else going on. It was a different sense of possibility. There was also a different sense of political urgency, right? The political emergency of the moment was very clear. And so for me, I'm a little daunted, and this is what I hope we get to talk about just how muddy and murky the water is politically, right? You can't agree on anything at all, it seems to me. And so how do we arrive at the sense of a new urgency? How do we get there? I mean, for me, I think we have to get beyond the politics of representation, of representation, right? So the ongoing conversations I've been having lately, I haven't seen any of these films, but for everything from The Help, which I haven't seen yet, I mean, don't spoil it for me. The Help to 12 Years a Slave, right? Ongoing conversation with people I think are really smart, who are trying to defend Steve McQueen. I like Steve McQueen's artwork, and I haven't seen the film just yet. I saw Shame, didn't like it so much. But why are we talking like that to like the things that we're being fed instead of like organizing from someplace deep inside about the world we want to live in, the world we want to inhabit? We're back on our heels, waiting for the next slide. So today I was talking about, I think it was the USA Today that talked about, I think, the Best Man film that somehow, it was called race themed, and then Black Twitter got all in a rage, and they had to apologize. So what if Black Twitter got in a rage about something else? I mean, think about it. What if it got in a rage not by external stimuli, but by, you walking down the street, or you heard some story about someone who couldn't get mental health assistance, or is not in proper housing. What I'm trying to say is, and it's a question for all of us, how do we get to a place where there's a sense of a political emergency?